So the meeting is now being recorded, and I'll take the sederet for this meeting of the Equal Opportunities Forum held on the 22nd of November 2023. I can see that we have present Councillor Kalikis, Councillor Clark, Councillor Corbett, is also present, as is Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Johnson-Dempsey. Councillor McAdams, apologies. Also present today are Councillors McGeever, Razak. I have apologies from Councillor Robb. Councillor Thompson? Not seeing you there. We also have a number of officers present and trades union representatives, as well as Daniel Gillies from MEND. And with that, I'll pass you back to the Chair to commence today's business. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Equal Opportunities. Apologies for signing in remotely, and I'm in Liverpool just now and heading back today. Can I have any declarations of interest?
I'm not seeing any hands, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And can we have agree on the previous minutes? That's page 3 to 6. Any questions?
No questions, no hands, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, and we take that as agreed. And item 3 is Daniel Gillies. Is Lindsay Taylor with yourself, Daniel?
Sadly, Lindsay's en route to London today, but she sends her best wishes and hopes to come here next time.
Oh, okay. And apologies for not being there, Daniel. It just seems to be cursed with equal opportunities meetings every time there's one on elsewhere. So you need to apologise for that. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for coming to talk about Islamophobia, the causes and cures. And if you can give us your presentation, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us along to mark Islamophobia Awareness Month. My name is Daniel Gillies. I'm the Scotland Junior Regional Manager for MEND. And I'm here in capacity today as MEND, but also as a volunteer of Islamophobia Awareness Month. This campaign is now entering its 11th year, and it's fantastic to see the campaign growing and to be in places like in Hamilton today in the South Lanarkshire HQ, where we have this presentation. MEND is a non-profit organisation. We are community funded, and we have a few goals and aims for the organisation, which are tackling Islamophobia, raising awareness of Islamophobia, and inviting Muslims, encouraging Muslims to get involved in the media and in politics, generally spaces where we see a lack of Muslim presence. The presentation today is Islamophobia Causes and Cures, and this presentation looks at the issue of Islamophobia. Initially, we cover the definition of Islamophobia and look at the theoretical aspect of Islamophobia, looking at the legal definitions, of which there are a few. We will then look at the causes of Islamophobia in society, particularly looking at the role of the media and barriers to participation. And then we'll look at the brighter side of things by looking at the causes, the cures of Islamophobia, as well as the successful changes we've seen so far. So we'll start off by looking at the theoretical aspect of the definition of Islamophobia. Definition of Islamophobia, which MEND as an organisation is particularly in favour of, is that of Fear Incorporated, the Centre for American Progress. This definition defines Islamophobia as an exaggerated, irrational fear, hatred and hostility towards Islam and Muslims, perpetuated by negative stereotypes, resulting in bias, discrimination, and marginalisation of Muslims from civic, social, and political life. However, this is not the only definition available. In 2018, the All-Party Parliamentary Group in Westminster on British Muslims put forward this definition of Islamophobia, which describes Islamophobia as being rooted in racism. It is a type of racism which targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. A couple of probably interesting, eye-catching aspects to this definition. Number one, the mention of the word race, when of course Muslims are part of a religion, not necessarily a race, and Muslims come in all shapes and sizes from all different ethnic and racial backgrounds. However, Islam is often racialized, and so that's why the word race is here, and in particular with regards to perceived Muslimness. The reason why perceived Muslimness is used here is to help us to capture all of the victims of Islamophobia who are not actually Muslim. Many Sikhs, Hindus, people of no faith at all are actually victims of Islamophobia, often in a case of mistaken identity. Actually, in Scotland, we've even had attacks on Sikh places of worship, Sikh gurdwaras, where there's been graffiti and attacks of an Islamophobic nature, where some very confused individuals targeted non-Muslims, but were seeking to attack Muslims. After 9/11, the first Islamophobic attack in America, in response, was committed against, was the murder of a Sikh individual, once again a mistaken identity, a Sikh being mistaken for a Muslim. So that's why this definition here is looking at Islamophobia beyond the Muslim victims, trying to capture all of those who are affected by Islamophobia. Same year, MEND put forward our own definition as well as guidelines that we encourage organisations to adopt alongside the definition. This has been accepted and adopted by all of the main political parties in Scotland and all of the main political parties except from the Conservative Party in England, rather the British Parliament. So this is something which we're proud of, or I think it's something which is very encouraging to see that we have all-round party support in Scotland. And we've also seen other institutions such as the University of Edinburgh and many other city councils and local authorities adopting this definition. But we think it's particularly important that the guidelines are adopted alongside this definition. We'll now look at the theory and proof of Islamophobia. Sometimes when we're having these conversations, people might ask, why don't we call it anti-Muslim hatred? Why the word phobia seems a bit unusual perhaps to some people. And of course, there is an anti-Muslim element. There is hate crime of a verbal and physical nature. These are often what makes the headlines in the news if we see a mosque has been burnt down or we see that a Muslim woman has been attacked on public transport, for example. However, using this diagram of the iceberg, we can see that there's a lot more going on below the surface. And this is why we use the word Islamophobia. We see that there's discrimination, there's stereotypes, there's exclusion and marginalisation in many different forms, and this is partly what we'll look at today. So we'll hopefully by the end of this presentation have an understanding of why we don't use the word as anti-Muslim hatred, but rather it's Islamophobia, which is a bit more holistic. We'll now look at the role of the media as a cause of Islamophobia in the UK. Here we have some snapshots of headlines, front pages from some of the most popular and widely read publications in the country. Some might have better reputations than others, but we see here that this is widespread. It's not just isolated to tabloid newspapers. It's actually something which, for example, I think the one that catches my eyes is in the middle we have The Spectator, which many might describe as being somewhat intellectual, and a publication which I'm sure has won many awards for its investigative journalism. But here we see that the individual in the middle who's been painted as a Muslim is a caricature of a Muslim, a man with bulging lips and a nose which has taken up half of the image, and some kind of ill attempt, probably an ill thought through attempt to paint an image of a Muslim. The headline is even more concerning, perhaps, which reads, "How to Spot the Jihadi Next Door." We live in a multicultural society, which I think many of us are very proud of, and many of us will work or live nearby Muslims in our offices and in our streets. But this article here we see is instigating some element of suspicion, some making us maybe raise an eyebrow when we see our Muslim neighbours, or maybe we see the children that our kids are playing with in the playground, those Muslim families that are in our societies, and this is how these kinds of articles can make a bit of suspicion, and sadly this suspicion can often lead to a kind of spiral of even further far right wing extremism as people are exposed to these kinds of stories on a regular basis. The CPG on Islamophobia at the Scottish Parliament in 2021 published a report which has really helped us in our work to understand Islamophobia in Scotland. Generally, we are looking at a lot of statistics from the Home Office, from England and Wales, but this cross-party group at the Scottish Parliament helps us to understand Islamophobia in Scotland. They found that almost 94% of Scottish Muslims think that the print media increases Islamophobia. They found that over 90% of Scottish Muslims think that broadcast media has increased Islamophobia. And we see here a snapshot from a popular television series, which here we're seeing the images of Muslims often painted in mainstream media in two extreme ways. Either a victim, a vulnerable woman in this case, or someone who's extreme and violent. It's not, we don't have it in this presentation, but I think it's also important to know that in this public inquiry conducted by the CPG at the Scottish Parliament, they also found that a similar percentage of Muslims in Scotland feel that social media is also to blame. Sorry, actually we have here 88% of Muslims in Scotland feel that social media is to blame. And this obviously poses a real challenge to the police in this country. And of course, as the new hate crime strategy has been rolled out across the country, we hope that there will be opportunities to tackle this form of Islamophobia. Sadly, however, the hate doesn't stop in the mind or when people are reading these articles, but sadly it can also turn into actions filled with hate, actions that have grave consequences. And here we have some of the images of some of the victims of Islamophobia, and we see that places of worship have been burnt to the ground, we see that gravestones are regularly vandalised, and we see that sadly some lives have been lost along the way in this battle against Islamophobia. Sadly, the most vulnerable in society are not free from being attacked, and we see here that Childline has recorded almost a 70% increase in racist bullying in recent years in the playground, the most common terms being bomber and terrorist. In my work, I regularly speak to young people in Glasgow and Edinburgh, across Scotland, and time again I hear similar stories, similar words being used, and despair from some of the youngest members of society that there isn't really much to be done about it. Of course, referring back to the diagram of the iceberg, we see that Islamophobia is not just what happens in the playground or what is clear for us to see, but sometimes it's hidden in plain sight. Here we have a study which was conducted by the BBC. 2017, they found that people submitting CVs with Muslim-sounding names are 3 times less likely to get a job interview. So a name such as Muhammad versus a name such as Adam can have massive consequences on a Muslim developing a career, even getting a job. And we see similar statistics when it comes to looking for housing, trying to find a place to rent. So it might sound surprising, but sometimes I even have conversations with Muslims who say, well, it's not really much of a problem. Maybe they've not experienced a physical attack themselves. But actually, there is so much going on below the surface that we just can't see, and we don't know if you send that CV in, were you declined on a legitimate basis, or was it simply because they didn't like the sound of your name? Across the country, we see that religious hate crime is on the rise. Actually, hate crime in general is on the rise, which is quite surprising. Especially during the pandemic, we've seen that actually, rather than hate crime decreasing, it actually just kind of, like the virus, mutated and found different ways of affecting the community. We see in these statistics that in this pie chart that roughly 40% of religious hate crime in the UK is targeting Muslims, and more of these are statistics from the Home Office, so they cover England and Wales, but we see a very similar picture in Scotland. These statistics are similar to those of 2021 to 2022. And just to give a rough idea, the Muslim community in Britain is about 5% of the population. So 5% of the population receiving 40% of the religious hate is something quite disproportionate. In recent times, we've seen, in the recent weeks, we've seen some local authorities, some policing services reporting a 400% and some even a 200% increase in Islamophobic attacks in recent weeks. This presentation was obviously created long before the recent unrest in the Middle East. However, there is a record, there is a trend, sadly, that we see young people being discriminated against in the institutions where they should really feel safest, in their schools. We see cases such as students being told they're not allowed to display a Palestinian flag as it is somehow connected to terrorism. And we see that incidents such as teachers making statements with regards to Palestinians, perhaps it was even indicating that it was their fault, that they've been bombed, that Palestine doesn't necessarily matter, and also seeing that Islamophobic language is often used with regards to this. Before we looked at the statistic of almost 70% increase in Islamophobic attacks in the playground, but also within the classroom, sadly, we see an ongoing challenging circumstances. And here we have some data on the left-hand side from the Islamophobia Response Unit. It's a group of lawyers that's tasked to support victims of Islamophobia. And we see that there are countless different ways that the sanctions against against Palestinian activism is affecting Muslim students, whether it's physical, verbal reprimands, but also detention and other punishments, as well as exclusion. We'll now move on to look at some of the victims of Islamophobia and some of the most severe incidents in this country and abroad. Here we have the incident of Zainab Hussain, who was on her way to on her way to school to drop off her children, and was attacked in a hit-and-run incident. The perpetrator was looking to take the lives of Muslims, and he set out that day to take the life of as many Muslims as he could. And as she walked her child to school, she was run over, and she begged her daughter to continue to school to seek help. And the man continued to drive and tried to take the lives of some Muslim children who were walking to school, and thankfully they managed to avoid and jumped out the way. He then drove around and drove over her again. You can see some of the images of the devastating injuries that were endured. Originally, this was recorded as not as a hate crime incident, but rather a hit-and-run incident. But thankfully, through the work with MEND and CPS and the police, we managed to make sure that this was recorded, rightly so, as attempted murder and as a hate crime. We have another incident which happened in recent years in 2017 in London, which some of us will probably remember, in Finsbury Park in London. The man on the left, Makram Ali, sadly lost his life during this attack, when the man on the right, Darren Osborne, went out to also kill as many Muslims as possible, and During this attack, he drove into a group of Muslims who were on their way home from prayers at Finsbury Park Mosque. During this attack, he drove into the crowd with his van and killed Makram Ali and severely injured 9 others. What's quite interesting about this case is that we see in the run-up to this attack, Darren Osborne was in touch with some far right-wing extremists, and he was also absorbing a lot of media, a lot of even mainstream media documentaries on Muslims which portrayed Muslims as extremists. In recent years, probably the incident of Islamophobic incident which grabbed the headlines the most was the Christchurch attack, 2019. This attack resulted in the murder of 51 individuals. Brenton Tarrant, a young man, set out on this day to fulfil his 74-page manifesto, which was inspired by white nationalist ideologies, to take as many lives as he could, and armed with his ammunition, which he'd stored up over the months, he attacked 2 mosques and sadly took the lives of 51 innocent people. At the time, the Brenton Tarrant was painted in some of the media as a confused young man, as a man with blonde hair and blue eyes, and where did it all go wrong? These kinds of ideas of some kind of sympathy for a man who was just simply confused. But we've seen that during this, just very shortly after this incident, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister at the time of New Zealand, made sure that this was recorded and was described as a terrorist incident, which it obviously was. On the left-hand side, we see an image of the youngest victim of this attack, a 3-year-old Mujad Ibrahim. And second from the left, we see the eldest, Haji Dawood Nabi, 71 years old. What particularly is, obviously all of these deaths are saddening, but what I think really grabs my attention here is that Haji Dawood Nabi was the welcoming committee. He was the man who greeted his attacker at the door with "Hello, brother," welcoming this man into the mosque. And generally this is the way that most people are welcomed into the mosque. These are places of peace, of family and of community, but sadly they were torn apart during this attack. Looking at the manifesto which Brenton Tarrant had composed, we see that there were references to the Great Replacement theory and an idea that he had of a white genocide, which was, as he termed it, an assault on the European people. So now we've looked at some of the theory and the background of Islamophobia, we'll look a bit more in depth into the causes of Islamophobia. The first cause we're going to look at today will be the cause number 1, media negativity. We've already looked at some of the roles that the British media plays in fueling Islamophobia. And here we have a statistic which can really help us to get our head around the impact this can have, where we see that for every 1 moderate mention Muslims have in the media, there in the printed press, there is 21 negative references. That's 21 references to an extremist Muslim. It's very difficult to imagine if we took somebody in the room today and said 21 horrible things about them and said, well, she's actually quite nice when you get to know her, he's actually an okay kind of guy. How could we possibly have a positive image if we're reading 21 extremist stories about this individual? So we see the headlines and we know that there is clearly an issue. Just taking one of these issues as an example, we have here Andrew Norfolk, a journalist who has written a couple of very troubling articles in the Times. And in this article in 2017 called the headlines, which was that a story of a Christian child who was supposedly forced into Muslim foster care and had her cross, a necklace with a cross on it, removed. This was immediately described as some kind of conversion attempt to bring this girl into the fold of Islam, but actually when the investigation was launched and understood that this family was trying to remove her for safekeeping and had no intentions to convert this young girl to Islam. However, we see that these kinds of articles do grab the headlines' attention time and time again. The representation of Muslims in the media has an impact on how people perceive the demographics of the Muslim population in the UK. And so, when asked what percentage of the population people think is Muslim, are Muslim, we see percentages well into the 30s and 40s. In London, people estimated that 35% of the population were Muslim. Up in the West Midlands, North West, 40%. And in Scotland, people estimated that 38% of the population are Muslim. I think perhaps even in the most Muslim parts of Scotland, I think you'd struggle to get beyond 20, 30%. But it's interesting just to see how the way that Islam and the way that the Muslim population is portrayed in the media has this impact on people's ideas. When we look at the actual statistics, we see that in London there's only about 12% of the population are Muslim. In the North West, closer to 5%. And in Scotland, we're barely 2% of the population. But it's interesting just to refer back to that, 40%. How that would mean that almost half of this room would be Muslim. But I think it's quite interesting to see the impact the media can have on people's understanding of an entire population. We'll now look at cause 2, which is the lack of legislative protection. I'll just say beforehand, we are obviously now in the latter stages of the rollout of the hate crime strategy, the hate crime legislation in Scotland. So some of these laws which are being referenced are not necessarily applicable to Scotland anymore. But we see that there are issues when it comes to legislating for protection of religious groups. And in the Race and Religious Hate Act, there is a difference in terms of how race and religious categories are protected. This obviously poses a challenge for the prosecution of hate crime. On the left-hand side, we can see the tick boxes for what can be classified as a hate crime against a race. On the left, we see an insult, abuse, violence or threats, and of course, intention to stir up hatred. These are all reasons why somebody can be arrested and prosecuted under this act. On the right-hand side, we see that people from religious backgrounds don't have these protections, so insult, abuse, even violence and threats are actually not sufficient to prosecute under this legislation. The evidence of how problematic this is can be seen here in this screenshot from former UKIP councillor Eric Kitson. Eric Kitson posted this image, which can be seen with an individual being burnt over a fire, which is supposedly a burning Quran, and a pig with the name on that hat is Allah, the Arabic for God. And below we see Eric Kitson's comment, which says, "Hang them all first, then ask questions later." This was reported, and the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, looked into it. However, there was nothing to do because there was, in their eyes, there was not sufficient evidence to prosecute because while they accepted there was definitely a case of abuse, definitely a case of potentially even threatening behaviour, this was not sufficient enough because there was simply no evidence, as they seen it, that this was meant with the intention to stir up religious hatred. We'll now move on to cause 3, which is structural barriers preventing Muslim participation in civic society. One of the main themes in the presentation, of course, is the media, and we see that when it comes to representation in the media, roughly 0.4% of journalists in the country are from Muslim backgrounds. We have some obviously famous faces, Faisal Islam, Mehdi Hassan. But when this is compared to the population of the UK, of Muslim population of the UK, which is close to 5%, you see that it's actually quite disproportionate. This is obviously problematic if we don't have Muslims writing articles about Muslims, or we don't even have Muslim presence in the main media firms in this country. That how can we realistically expect any fair representation or fair understanding of the Muslim community? And it's no surprise that there are misunderstandings and misrepresentations. When it comes to the House of Commons and the House of Lords, we see that out of 650 Muslim MPs, there are 18 Muslim MPs, and in the House of Lords, an even lower percentage. We see there's only 18 out of, lower fraction, 18 out of 800 Lords. So, again, like the media, if Muslims don't have this representation in places where legislation is made and these massive life-changing decisions are rolled out, that of course Muslims are going to be affected, and sadly this is time and time again we see the legislation is just simply not offering protection to the Muslim community on a whole range of fronts, and the Muslim voice is lacking in these places. We'll now move on to section 3 of the presentation, which is looking at the cures of Islamophobia. Of course, reporting Islamophobia is crucial, and in Scotland there is a fantastic website where we can report hate crime anonymously to Police Scotland. There's also third-party reporting centres. Of course, raising awareness, so after this presentation I'll discuss the Islamophobia awareness campaign, which is a large part of the work of raising awareness. And of course, creating partnerships. We need to create partnerships with local authorities, with the police, and with interfaith organisations, many other organisations we work with, and running campaigns throughout the year. We run campaigns such as GoAv, Get Out and Vote, which encourages Muslims to get involved in the democratic process. We also, of course, engage with our stakeholders throughout the year. So what are we aiming to achieve? Men's aiming to achieve a major reduction in Islamophobia across the UK. We wish to empower the Muslim community, especially with regards to media and political engagement. We hope to secure a Muslim future for our children in Britain. We hope that our children can feel comfortable and safe to express their Muslim identity. And we'd hope to see a general appreciation for the reality of contributions of Muslims and Islam to the UK. We have the Islamophobia Response Unit, a group of lawyers which provides support to victims of Islamophobia. This is very active in England, but sadly in Scotland it's still in its early stages. And just simply raising awareness can make a great deal of difference. And by hosting meetings like today, we hope that just by starting these conversations, we can have a direct impact on tackling Islamophobia. By hosting workshops, by hosting presentations in the workplace, in places of worship, youth groups, various organisations, we hope that this will be a step in the right direction. Now just to discuss Islamophobia Awareness Month. Islamophobia Awareness Month is now entering its 11th year, so we're very proud of that, and in Scotland I particularly feel that this year has been a kind of giant leap forward in a sense, where we had a major event at the Scottish Parliament, and we're here today. We're here in many local authorities for the first time, which is, I think, is an especially important milestone. There are many different ways for people to get involved in this campaign. Ultimately, this campaign has two goals which are quite similar to that of MEND, and hence we're the lead partner in Scotland for the campaign. The goals are to obviously raise awareness of Islamophobia, to tackle Islamophobia, but also to raise awareness of the positive contributions Muslims make to society. Today we're hosting the Causes and Cures presentation, but there's also an Islamophobia Awareness Month presentation, which is a bit more condensed, which can be delivered to many different groups. But we also have the Islamophobia Awareness Month exhibition. This exhibition is only a couple of metres long, can sit in the reception. It's a fantastic way for people to interact with the campaign. We're also very active on social media, and we encourage everybody to sign up as supporters. I've got some materials which I can distribute as well if people would like to share with their colleagues. And we encourage people to host their own events. We have lots of different creative events going on. We've had interaction with some sports groups in Glasgow where we've had football matches. We've had engagements with cultural organisations looking at the historical background, the heritage of Muslims in Scotland. And we encourage everybody to really take on the campaign. The theme this year for Islamophobia Awareness Month is Muslim Stories. And the aim is to really put people back in to the statistics. We have lots of percentages, lots of dates, lots of fractions. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact that behind all of these numbers there's somebody with a story, and everybody, Muslim, non-Muslim, is encouraged to get involved in this storytelling campaign. Beyond Islamophobia Awareness Month, we have 11 other months, and we hope that we don't just talk about Islamophobia during Islamophobia Awareness Month. Throughout the year we have conferences and gatherings which we encourage everybody to get involved with, and we have training which can be delivered with beyond the Causes and Cures presentation. We have bystander training, we have other training opportunities which look at microaggressions as well. So we encourage this to be a conversation that isn't restricted to any particular one time of the year. Across the country, during Islamophobia Awareness Month and throughout the year, we engage with mosques, women's organisations, schools, professional networks and universities. And this is particularly encouraging, and we see that many organisations are now taking on the campaign, and we're no longer having to knock on the door. We find out about the events afterwards sometimes, which is a great thing. So we're here to support, but also, if people are happy to host their own events, then that's fantastic. As I mentioned before, we have Get Out and Vote campaign, and in Scotland we've hosted it feels like some time ago now, and so some faces have changed, but we have hosted all of the main political party leaders for a hustings event, which we're particularly proud of, and we hope to do that again in the future as the general election nears. And this is a really good opportunity for every community to get involved and to have these discussions with politicians to help us to understand them and for them to understand us. Similar hustings events have been hosted all across the country in England and Wales as well. So there's plenty more to find out about. We have Islamophobia Awareness Month website, and we have the MEND website where you can find out much more information as well. But I'm aware I've been talking for a little while now, so I'd like to just open the floor to any questions and to have a discussion about what's been mentioned. And I'm aware that some of it's particularly heavy as well. I don't know if people want to have a break as well. But thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to the discussion that we can have. I'll just stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Daniel. We've got 20 minutes left before we go on a break. Any questions?
Chair Councillor Clark has his hand raised.
Okay, Ross.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, and thank you very much for that presentation. It was very detailed and it was very informative to hear. Many of the questions I had were actually covered by yourself, so I suppose that's a good mark there. But I suppose my question would be, on what we can do as a local authority and as councillors. So what can we do as local politicians to change our political culture to try and encourage Muslim communities to get engaged locally? It doesn't need to be just standing for elected office, but to engage in their local communities and consultations that we're doing. So a lot of the time, I think, in the past, politicians have had the attitude of, or people need to come to us, but I think we need to do more to engage people and go to them rather than just expecting it to come the other way around. And you mentioned about having a partnership with local authorities. So what can we do better to have a better? But what can we do to have a better partnership between South Lanarkshire and Mend? Thank you.
I think there's a lot to do, and I think we've, this, I hope, will be the start of that partnership. There's quite a lot that we can do, and one of the most important things, I think, is just making sure that the training is available, and and I hope that this is an opportunity for that. But I'm aware that many local authorities have their training packages which are available, as part of to all council employees, and if we could, work together on making sure that that's the case, that Islamophobia awareness training is part of all of the training packages from the council, that's a great step forward. And I think, time and again we see that young people are particularly affected, and I think there are a lot of things that we can do with regards to education. If there's a way for us to work together with the education department to try to roll out some of these packages, we have a fantastic organisation that we work with called Educate Against Islamophobia, and they have a fantastic package of it. All the materials are there, it's sort of ready to go into the curriculum, and we've already delivered this to some local authorities, and it's been very well received. And it has materials for nursery school age all the way through to high school, and it's all very age appropriate as well. So I think this is also a good conversation to have. I think just at kind of a more personal level, especially perhaps more for elected officials, that we, generally speaking, the Muslim community, the door's wide open, and mosques are generally very welcoming places, and I think just being there when they've got the family fun day or whatever, or even on a Friday for Friday prayers, I think generally speaking that's very much appreciated. Just that presence, not just at election time, is crucial, and I think there is, I think we see that is the case in many places, but it's sometimes, as you said, sometimes there is that expectation that the community should come to the elected officials, but actually the elected officials being present in the community, I think is much easier. And especially in Scotland, we've got quite a diverse community in the Muslim population. We have a community which has been here for decades, for very well established, but we also have communities whom have maybe arrived in the past recent years, especially from Syria and Sudan, and I think we need to be particularly aware that maybe people, when they've just arrived in a country, don't particularly feel that politics is a space for them. There is sometimes a hesitancy to even raise a voice, to ask for help when there are attacks, because people don't want to so-called rock the boat. People don't want to feel like they're speaking up too much. So I think there's a real issue of underreporting, and I think if there's anything that elected officials can do to bridge that gap between the police and the criminal justice system and individuals who are attacked, I think that would be particularly useful. But it does require a kind of a long-term strategy. I think it's that this is an issue which is sadly, from looking at the recent data, is actually increasing rather than decreasing. But I think just having that willingness, just having that openness is a fantastic thing, and also just acknowledging that perhaps there is an issue. Perhaps looking into our own organisations and seeing, well, are there facilities for prayer? Are there is there food that everybody can enjoy from every faith, not just from the Muslim faith, but is there faith literacy? Does everybody in the organisation have an understanding of sensitivities around certain cultures? I say that extends beyond the Muslim population. That's that's also affecting the Jewish community, Christian community as well. I think often on this path of trying to make our spaces more inclusive, there's a lot of awkward conversations, and that's okay. I think that's the other thing, is it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask an awkward question as well. It's not just my thoughts.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mark?
Thanks very much, Mark. Just realised I'm using the wrong thing, so I'm going to change seat. Salaam alaikum. Thanks very much for doing that presentation. It was genuinely informative, and one of the things that kind of you said that really stood out for me was the kind of, well, you used the word spiral, and you know, I think that really rings true. And if you're getting 21 to 1, a ratio of 21 to 1 negative, you know, to positive mentions in the press, including sadly some broadsheet and quality publications, I think we're kind of only going to encourage, you know, at a very low level more prejudice, which feeds into more marginalisation, which, you know, divides us even further as a community, and I'd be genuinely worried about that. And I'm kind of curious as would what your perspective might be on, is this a problem that, I think we'd like to think that as the generations go on that it gets better, but from personal experience, I'm retraining, so I'm at university now, and I've noticed that there seems to be, it's immediately obvious amongst the younger groups of people that they do seem to be segregating, you know, and male and female, and then into different ethnic groups, different religious or perceived religious groups, much more so than amongst the people my age. And I'm wondering, is this something that, you know, maybe that is getting worse, that, you know, are young people, do you think, coming out of schools and out of our communities and not seeing each other primarily for the person they are, but by their characteristics? I mean, is this, sorry, it's a big, long-worded, rambling question, but I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts on it.
I think it's really interesting. I think I'm not aware of, you know, I haven't read any research specifically about young people's attitudes, but there are some surprises that come along, and recently there's been research to indicate that actually people from more affluent neighbourhoods, postcodes, are more likely to have Islamophobic beliefs, which I find quite interesting as well. You know, we might have a kind of stereotype of who, you know, the right-wing extremist is, in these protests and stuff, but actually we see that there's actually some quite disturbing attitudes in sections of society where, you know, perhaps some things are painted a bit more rosy than others. But I think with regards to, you know, the issue getting worse, I just speak from my own experience talking to people and across the country. I do feel a sense of despair sometimes, and I mean despair in terms of a grassroots level, just in the general population, but also despair amongst some academics, people who have been, you know, anti-racism campaigners for quite a lengthy period of time, and I've heard them, you know, in the, you know, seminars and meetings where they say, "I'm just tired, you know, I'm just quite tired of trying to deal with this." But I mean, it's just myself, you know, I'm just very optimistic, and, you know, I think we must be optimistic in dealing with this. And you know, in this presentation, you know, if there's a bit more time, I would have probably elaborated a bit more that, you know, I think it's important that we do remember, you know, the days when, you know, an African American individual couldn't sit on the same bus as somebody who was white European, for example. You know, and you know, there are, I mean, you know, by no means the race issue in America is not solved, but things have improved in some ways, and I think it's just important that we have that at the back of our minds, that there was once upon a time great instability in this country in different ways as well, and we have achieved a lot. So I think it's just important to keep on casting our minds back to know there was a time when, you know, this section of society was outcast, wasn't represented, and you know, and you know, and I hope that one day this will also be history. I hope one day people will look back with, you know, scratching their heads, thinking how did that how did they possibly allow these people to you know, to publish such hateful articles and all that. But I think that there are, and actually on that note, what's important is the definition of Islamophobia is not political. Doesn't seek to censor conversations about Muslims, and that's the other thing. You know, it's important that we, you know, when we live in this, you know, free, liberal, democratic society, that we're open to criticising. If, you know, any, you know, I think probably the biggest critics of Muslims are Muslims themselves. You know, there's no attempts to silence criticism, but it's when it's hate-filled. This is the issue. I think, I think it's interesting. I'm just trying to reflect on what you're just saying, this image of people kind of in their own boxes, and I see, I think the longer any community's been in a particular city or a town, it does just naturally sometimes, you know, people congregate, and that's natural, especially if people have come from a foreign land and they just want to be with people who they can understand and relate to. And I think that requires a really big effort from everybody, you know, not you know, from within and outside our own communities to try to build those bridges. But I do think there is an alarming increase in, I think, in recent weeks, as we've seen, you know, the Muslim population being, you know, in the spotlight again. We do see that there has been a flare up, and I suppose, you know, historically looking at, you know, times when economic stagnation appears as well, you know, people do look for these routes. So I think that's it's just at times of peace we should really be, you know, working it. And as an organisation, we share interfaith platforms, and just to say, you know, like we don't wish to see, you know Muslim towns and you know Muslim people living in a certain corner of the city. You know, we do share many interfaith platforms, and I think in Scotland there's a really rich interfaith culture. You know, we have you know a really big success story compared to other places. I really do not know what we do for the younger generation who have those beliefs and are, you know, kind of segregating themselves. I think sometimes you just kind of need to really have a frank discussion about that. Yeah. What about yourself? You know, in terms of, you know, when you're seeing these kind of people segregating themselves, what do you think? You know, is there anything that you think would be helpful? Or?
Sorry, I'm just going to. Am I still? Yeah, still being heard. That's cool. Yeah, no, I think it is interesting because I always wonder, or what it makes me think is you know, are we, basically by we I mean the majority portion of the community, are we failing to make an environment that's inclusive, an environment that's welcoming to people who maybe have a minority faith or, you know, from a different ethnic group or whatever, and would that be, you know, the onus really, I would think you're looking at population level, which should be on, you know, well, we're at local government, we're the councillors, so you would think, well, we should have an obligation really to make sure that, for example, schools, and I don't want to blame the schools, but that we are encouraging people to come through, and, you know, that everybody can take part in every opportunity, that there's no perception that it's not for me because I'm different, you know, that it's for everybody. And I just wonder if we're doing that quite as well as we should be, because it seems as though, you know, if people are not comfortable mingling to the extent that maybe we would like, then that suggests there's a deeper problem, that they've no doubt experienced prejudice, that they've experienced things that have made them uncomfortable. So, you know, from the point of view of local government, I think it would be really important that we look at what kind of things go on every day below the radar, from, you know, right from almost nursery school upwards, that are encouraging a mindset of otherness and a mindset that people aren't, you know, the same as me, and you know, I'd be quite worried about that, because certainly from, you know, from the presentation you gave there, I thought it does chime with a lot of what I'm hearing. I think you'd mentioned Christchurch actually, and that stuck out for me because I've got family in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I remember the day that happened. And what struck me was that after it, I thought my perception from here was that New Zealand society seemed to do better than we do about recognising what it was, that it was, you know, that it was hatred, it wasn't Islamic terrorism, it was Islamophobic terrorism from a white European person. And I'm not sure we're as good here in the UK or in Scotland at calling that out or immediately recognising it for what it is. And certainly when you look at the kind of references, the headlines you'd shown us there in your presentation, I think, you know, it's striking the way, you know, the word Muslim is often thrown in when it's completely superfluous to the issue. It does not need to be there, and it wouldn't, you know, if you'd replaced it with the word Christian, well, you wouldn't. That headline would never have been written. And, you know, so things like that, I think, you know, kind of jump out at me as though we've probably got a deeper societal problem than a lot of us realise, because day to day, if you look like me, you don't have to realise it. You're not presented with it day to day. It's not, you know, materially affecting our lives. And I think that's something that maybe I'm going to go away and think a lot more about. But certainly if there's anything, I think that, you know, anyone's got any ideas about how we can overcome that at very low level everyday interactions and try and build up, you know, the acquaintanceships that lead to friendships, that lead to, you know, better societies in general, and I think it'd be very welcome, certainly at this forum. Yeah. Thanks very much. Sorry, I've rambled on, and I know others want to speak, so I'll shush.
Okay, we've got
Councillor Isaac. Councillor Calicus would like to come in.
Okay, Janine.
Hi there. Is my mic on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, okay, sorry. I think we have been a wee bit of gremlins this afternoon, but okay. I wanted to just say how grateful I was for the presentation, and to just kind of pick up on a couple of things. I thought it was really interesting, what you were saying about literacy around faith. I think having sort of interactions and discussions like this are going to be so sort of key to helping people kind of different faiths and none understand each other and understand what the issues are. And I think going back to sort of touching a wee bit on what Mark was talking about, I think it's probably perfectly natural for people to sort of congregate where they feel safe. I think we all do that. And you know, as Mark was saying, you want people to feel safe everywhere, but what we've been hearing about, you know, the media, social media, I just feel that people feel emboldened to say things that maybe, you know, you were talking about going back a few decades when we you know, we had these things were much worse. But I don't know what your perception is, but I feel like there was a short period of time when it almost felt like things were better. And I appreciate I'm saying that as a white agnostic person, so you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just feel like lately I find people almost saying things and, you know, in public, and thinking that you'll agree with them when they say kind of Islamophobic things, and they might not be overtly, they might not be something that would be classed as a hate crime, but it might just be something, you know, a stereotype or something like that. And I feel it's so important to always sort of counteract that and say, you know, it's not acceptable to say that, don't say that to me. And so I think events like this where we're able to, you know, have people in to educate us are really important. Sorry, I kind of waffled on and lost my point there, but main point is thank you very much for coming along today.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you and you know and felt that it was time well spent, and it's been a real pleasure just to have the conversations here as well. And I never wish to be lecturing, so it's I really appreciate just hearing everybody's feedback and having this constructive conversation. Just on the point of did things get better and now we're kind of going back the way I think. I feel that something similar has happened. I'll try not oversimplify things, but I think we've had years of austerity, which has been profoundly damaging to many people, and pandemic which has followed onto a cost of living crisis. These all have an impact immensely on especially sections of society that were already having a bit of a rough time. So I think that I think these things are particularly problematic. But I think when we look at especially what goes on south of the border, when we look at Westminster and consistently having policies of an anti-immigrant nature, consistently having policies which are quite clearly quite racist, and consistently some people consistently pushing for British nationalist kind of ideas of separation from the EU, and all of that. These kinds of conversations, I think, have all led to a kind of othering of people, and they didn't need to. I think that's we can talk about Brexit without being racist. It's perfectly valid to have conversations about immigration as well, but also we don't need to become racist. All of these issues of international affairs and economics are totally valid and worthy of discussion, but they don't need to lead to, oh yeah, it's because of, you know, this particular race or because of this particular religion. And so I think there's been a marginalisation which I think has really been sadly really fueled by a lot of economic instability and inconsistent policies which do marginalise sections of society. I don't think there's really I don't think there's really much more that I can think of. That, you know, I think all of these things would naturally lead to some kind of alienation, not just of the Muslim community, but of othering so many other sections of society.
Thank you. I'm just going. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to be very quick with mine, Daniel. I'm mindful that we're running over just now for the break. First thing I would say is I was really pleased with the autumn statement that the Chancellor has given £7 million for to help combat anti-Semitism. But I was equally disappointed that there was no mention of Islamophobia, which has been rampant, which has gone up 250% during the Troubles just now. So it sends the wrong message when things like that happen. There seems to be that, you know, they're seeing the plight of one faith, but they're not seeing the plight of the other faith, and issues that are happening here in our doorstep. The other one would be that hate speech in social media. You mentioned that the biggest problem with that is that once it's reported, it takes a while for that post to go down, and that's quite concerning because it gives it more air miles while it's out there. And the recession is always a big factor when it comes to racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, because a lot of the time people look to blame someone, and the minorities tend to be the ones that get the brunt of that. Sorry, apologise for whizzing through this, but because we're overrunning in the break. It's not just whenever the faith is Muslims are mentioned, not just for terrorism. It's anything negative that's happened. If something's happened within the person that happens to be Muslim, his faith will always get mentioned, and that doesn't happen with any other faith, which I find really strange. The perception posted in social media often is that Muslims are anti-Christmas and they're anti-poppy and other things, and that narrative is just spreading for one reason only, and that is to try and drive a wedge and to create a hate. So there is a, you know, for me there's a drive by some groups to for division, and division is the thing that's stoking things up. The only question would be that we would like to sit down with yourselves and look at recommendations for training, because we've done a lot of training on this matter as well, and there's language training and other trainings we've done, and if there's anything we've missed out, we'd like to discuss that later on if that's okay. And one final one would be that when you mentioned about the CVs and Muslims 3 times less likely to get an interview, that is a problem. It's a problem that I've seen myself, and that we did do some work on here. I was proud to say that in South Lanarkshire Council we did a bit of work on that, and we have been working on that still currently, and it would be good to speak to yourself on that matter as well. Okay, thank you very much. I think we shall take a 5-minute break just now, and apologies Daniel for not asking you to come back in for a reply, because we're 5 minutes over and we really need to take a 5-minute break. Thank you very much. So agenda item 4 is annual report on mainstreaming, equalities and diversity, housing technical resources, PEAD 7 to 18. Can I ask Anne Despot, project advisor, to speak for the report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for letting me come along this afternoon to provide this annual update. The purpose of the report is set out section 1.1 is to provide an overview of progress made in relation to mainstreaming equalities within housing and technical resources during 2022 and 23, and to highlight the key actions being progressed during 2023 to 2024. Section 3 of the report sets out the background and highlights that Housing Technical Resources Equality and Diversity Coordinating Group has oversight of the Housing Technical Resources Equality and Diversity Work Plan. And on an annual basis, we report to Housing Technical Resources Committee, which sets out progress over the year and sets out the priorities for the year ahead, which was approved on the 8th of November 2023. The last Equality and Diversity Update report was provided to Equal Opportunities Forum on the 21st of September 2022. Section 4 sets out national and local policy developments and which are relevant to equality and diversity and which have been impacted upon the resource and the work of the resource within the year. Section 5 sets out the key areas of progress during 2022 to 23, and Section 5.1 provides a summary of progress, including the continued delivery of affordable housing programme, continued engagement with our residents at our 2 Gypsy Traveller sites, delivery of Year 4 of our Rapid Rehousing Transitioning Plan, working with the South Lanarkshire Access Panel and Disability Partnership Housing Subgroup to promote accessibility, and working with partners to deliver the housing aspects of the Promise Scotland for care-experienced young people. Section 6 sets out the consultation, engagement and customer feedback section, which highlights the commitment to and arrangements for engaging with a wide range of equality groups and stakeholders. And these stakeholders have been instrumental, particularly in the review of our key strategic area of work around the local housing strategy for 22 to 27. While that's not an exhaustive list, I would point out that there has been no reference made to our armed forces and veterans, which should have been included. Section 8 sets out the employee learning and development and obviously details the range and breadth of the quality and diversity related learning for the resource during 2022 to 23. Section 10 then sets out the key priorities for 23 to 24, and these have been found in Appendix 2, and these include ensuring that our new IT system is developed to appropriately collect and report equalities information, responding to local and national developments by reviewing housing policies, strategies with a key focus on equalities and human rights, to ensure they continue to meet current and future priority objectives for the resource, delivering on Year 5 of the Rapid Rehousing Transitioning Plan, and continuing to support the programme of refugee resettlement and asylum dispersal within South Lanarkshire. Turning back to the recommendation set at 2.1, we'd ask the Forum to approve the recommendation that the actions for 2022-23 are noted and the key actions for 2023-24 also be noted in terms of mainstreaming inequalities. Happy to take any questions, and if that I can't answer, I will come back if that's okay with the Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Ross?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that report. I've got a few, I'd say more comments than questions. I think there's things that are important to raise anyway. Of course, mentions our Gypsy Traveller sites and our work with our Gypsy Traveller communities. And of course, it's something which I've said, multiple times. But again, I think it's an important thing to highlight the good work that is going on with our communities and their involvement with, the master plans and all the other work that's going on in our sites. But it is also, of course, important to recognise that there's still a lot more work to do and things aren't perfect, and there's still things that we should be working on and continuously engaging with our communities there, because problems do and will continue to arise. I suppose the general point relates to what I actually said in the previous item. What works well is, and what I can see that we are doing, is going to those communities, going to those sites, I've been in the new facility at the Lark Hall site at Shawlands a few times now, and we're actually going there rather than expecting them to come to us. Both myself and the MSP for the area, Christina McKelvey, have held surgeries down there, and that's been incredibly useful and engaging the community down there and picking up a lot of these problems they wouldn't have otherwise. And many of the residents are saying to us that they're now also starting to get engaged politically as well, not party political, but researching and finding out who their councillors are, who their MP, MSP is, and thinking about how they might vote in the next election and actually starting to participate in there. So there's good steps being made there. So I hope we continue a lot of that work. Another point, rather than in question, just on the refugee resettlement programme, I suppose with this, the action that we're doing is obviously the most important thing, but I think it's for us as politicians as well to set out that marker that we do want to be a welcoming place for refugees as much as we can, especially in recent times with the conflict in Gaza and Israel. I, speaking personally as a councillor, would want us to, as I've referred to, be as welcoming as we possibly could. And I suppose more of another separate point I have that I only picked up reading the papers a few minutes ago under, I think it's the South Lanarkshire Autism Strategy. It mentions better understand the housing and support needs of people with autism, and I think that mentions it a couple times. And now each person is different, but I think that the widely accepted language within the autistic community is identity focused language. So you would say autistic people rather than a person with autism. Of course, I said it's a case by case basis, whatever that person prefers. I think that the widely accepted language would be autistic people, if that could be taken into account in future reports and things that we're doing. Again, I think that's all I've covered. Everything I was wanting to there. Again, more so comments rather than questions. I think all important things to highlight.
Thank you, Ross. And Mark? Apologies, Mark, I didn't see you there.
No, that's all right, Mo. Sorry, it's because if I hit the button in this speaker, it unfortunately overrides everything, so I had to put it off again. But well done for noticing that I had my hand up. Thank you. It was just a couple of quick questions, and I appreciate you may not have the answers at this point, but any kind of feedback would be appreciated. Firstly, was on the mention of the refugee resettlement programme, and I noticed that it said 79 families were helped, so I presume from that we can infer that there's quite a few children or young people involved. And they obviously have different needs, from the local authority and from their new community than older people. Tends also to be men, I think, are more likely to be migrants to migrate in the first instance. So basically I'm wondering, do we have any feedback on whether those specific needs are met? It's maybe a kind of a different kind of department that has to be involved, I guess, or more departments need to be involved in that. So any kind of feedback would be good to see if there's anything more we should be doing. And secondly, kind of separate to that, the support for care experienced young people. I'm just wondering if we've got any indications of the effectiveness of what we kind of do, and are more care experienced young people going into positive destinations than might have been the case a couple of years ago, and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Councillor. On the first point, I think probably just to re-emphasise that the resettlement team do an awful lot of good work working with individuals across that, and I think that's to be acknowledged, but also work very closely with other resources, including education resources, and that's an ongoing and it's a fluid situation, as you can appreciate. So obviously we may deal with a particular person where, yep, flying, they're doing really well, and then we pick the person back up again to try and help them. And again, it's about linking in with those particular support agencies. So I think that team does a really good job, and I think they're kind of like central to what we actually deliver. So it's all positive. On the second point, I'll come back to you following the meeting if that's okay with some additional information. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
There are no further hands, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anne, for the report. And the date of the next meeting is 21st of February 24, and there's no urgent business. So thank you for attending, and apologies for being online again.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I hope wish you well in your travels. Hope you get back safe.
Well, it's not